Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. And Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
As we hit our stride here in the summer months, of course, hot Carolina weather is not anything about business, but business does roll on, and so do many things, including the North Carolina ports coming out of what COVID had done to all ports and all transportation. We will meet the new executive director of the North Carolina ports, and we start our dialogue in just a moment. Stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Bob Quinn from the South Carolina Research Authority, Anna Beavon Gravely of NCFREE, and special guest, Brian Clark, Executive Director of the North Carolina Ports.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us, Anna Beavon. Bob, good to see you both. Happy summer. Hope it's going well for you both.
Great. Yeah. Loving it.
You know, one of the things that keeps bubbling up, and it's hard to get anybody kind of focused back on business and policy right now. General assemblies are either out or on break, and businesses, it's like, we've had enough of it. Let's just go down to the beaches for a while. But this idea that we are short on labor keeps coming up, and it's not just short on labor like it's been over the last 5 or 10 years. Anna Beavon, I want to start with you, and Bob, I expect you to fully wade in on this one. So we've got unemployment, federal unemployment benefits either ending or, in South Carolina's case, Governor McMaster has already ended it. And then we've got employees that are just not in the workforce anymore. So this unemployment stew, trying to find talent, do you see that it's going to abate at some degree? Anna Beavon, I'll start with you.
Unfortunately, I think that as long as the rhetoric around continuing to provide money for those who are unemployed at a higher rate than it's been before is going to make it really, really difficult for people to go back to work and to want to go back to work. And it's going to make it very difficult for businesses to provide an incentive for those people to come back to work because they can't meet those prices.
Bob, does that, with Governor McMaster signing this thing into law about no more federal unemployment benefits are flowing through, we're stopping it, is there, we don't want anyone to be at risk, but is there some hope and optimism that this is going to get people back into the workforce?
Yes, definitely. And I'm involved with the state chamber, and certainly the state chamber advocated the governor's action there. It really has reached a crisis point in a number of industries, food and bev most significantly. Mm-hmm. I was recently down in Edisto, and there was an announcement of one of the restaurants was going to be closed for the next week. And the sole reason was lack of staff, and that's happening throughout Charleston. So it's kind of ironic and sad that the food and bev industry and hospitality industry in Charleston suffered through the pandemic, where they're being inundated with tourists coming in, and yet they're not able to fully capitalize on that given the lack of workers.
Bob, I'm sorry, Bob, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think about Charleston. Was there a debrief or any type of unofficial word coming out of Spoleto, especially when you've got all of these forces convening in Charleston to say, our food and bev, our restaurant business was horrible? Or was it passable? Or was there something that came out of that?
Well, it certainly wasn't horrible. And kudos to the folks at Spoleto who pulled off a wonderful session, given all of the dynamics they had to deal with. Yeah. I would give it a passable, but we need to do better than passable.
AB, how you feeling about the restaurant business? You live in a tent in the Triangle, and there are plenty of restaurants, but even now, are you finding that it's still highly risky industry?
Well, it's a really interesting space to be because we have a lot of people who are out and about. People are going to restaurants. They want to be in the world. They want to see one another and move on past COVID. But the restaurants are operating at fewer hours, whether they're closed on Mondays and Tuesdays when previously they were open, or they take a break in the middle of the day. They're open at breakfast and not for lunch until dinner. It's just, they're trying to figure out how they can survive with the workers that they have while still providing a good or a service that we really want. We want to eat at restaurants. We want to enjoy being in the world. And that is harder to do when the time is not as predictable.
Mm-hmm. Bob, let me come back to you and shift gears here, hit a couple things. First of all, in commerce in South Carolina, you've got a new Secretary of Commerce, Harry Lightsey, that's been named, obviously. You've got a new statewide chamber, Bob Morgan. Both of these are key roles now for the next at least handful of years. Is there optimism? Is there cautiousness? What's the general sense about economic development now in the near term?
Yeah, it's tremendous optimism, and I could not start this without giving tremendous thanks to Bobby Hitt and everything that he and his team accomplished in the last decade. Something like $36 billion in capital investment, 129,000 new jobs, 17% increase in manufacturing jobs. So Harry comes in standing on broad shoulders and a strong foundation. I think he's exactly the right person at the right time. Given his background, senior leadership at Bell South and AT&T at a time when the internet was exploding, given his leadership in emerging technologies at GM, he brings a passion and an understanding for the role of technology in economic development that I think will take the state to the next level. He's already announced that he also wants to focus on industries like life sciences, that we've already had a strong growth in. Actually, it's the fastest growing industry in the state, but he wants to double down on that. And then Bob Morgan, coming from your hometown in Charlotte, I think would be a fantastic partner. And he brings that economic developer mindset that I think is exactly what we need as a state right now.
Let's shift gears a little bit more. Anna, Beavon, I want to bring this back to North Carolina for you. And while economic development has certainly been important in the old North State, it has not taken the headlines like the budgetary process. So the General Assembly in North Carolina is on break, but they're not anywhere near a budget. So how do you see this? What do you see as being the biggest battle in the budget whenever they do finalize it in August or early fall?
Yeah, there are going to be three major chunks. I think pretty much both chambers agree in infrastructure and committing more money to broadband, to water and sewer, to those types of things and issues. But there are three major issues that we're going to see a lot of conversation around, and it's no surprise. It's going to be taxes, and education and Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion just continues to come up year after year after year because that is Governor Cooper's, that is a huge issue for him. He continues to bring it up. He will not sign budgets because of it. North Carolina hasn't had a budget since 2017. We've been continuing to pass mini budgets, but passing a collective budget, this would be a big deal for North Carolina to have a full budget, a normal budget this year.
Is education at the top of that? You think education is the biggest battle?
I think that is the battle that is easiest to message because you're dealing with a lot of teachers in the state. You're dealing with teachers who haven't gotten raises in the last couple of years. And a lot of that is because the governor didn't sign the budget. He vetoed the budget that gave teachers raises because it wasn't high enough. So that's continuing to be a topic. I mean, his budget that he put forth had quite a bit for teachers. And so that's going to be a sticking point between the legislature and the governor for sure.
Is there just quick within 30 seconds? If the plan is to reduce corporate tax from 2.25 down to 0. Can that revenue be made up fairly easily, or is that a bigger mountain to climb?
I definitely think so. We've continued to see year after year surplus. This year we have a $6.5 billion surplus, and we're finding ways to make up that money for sure. Yeah.
Bob, just back to you. And again, very quickly, we're going to bring our guest in here in a second. Proterra is a bus maker in the upstate of South Carolina. I know you know that well. I'm saying that for the benefit of our viewers. But why has this stood out as being such a unique economic development win?
Well, Chris, it's a great story. And it's one that's demonstrating where a group of individuals and organizations help to save a company that now is the country's leader in electric buses. So we recruited them back in 2011 into Greenville from Colorado. And they're an electric bus, but they also have charging stations and batteries, and they're expanding beyond buses as well. And when they landed in Greenville, they had a promise for tens of millions of dollars of investment from a VC that they pulled out. And so they literally had only a handful of weeks of runway. And we stepped in, as well as Venture South and a handful of high net worth individuals. And we did it for a smart investment, but we also did it in terms of civic duty, because we saw the potential of this company to grow. Fast forward, they now have 350 people working for them in the upstate. They have been able to garner hundreds of millions of dollars of venture capital from the likes of Kleiner Perkins. And last month they went public on NASDAQ, and I was actually honored to be with them as they rang the closing bell. So it's an incredible story that's just starting, but it's a great example of technology-based economic development and strategic investment at its best.
There is a new sheriff in town, or at least in Wilmington and Morehead City, which impacts, of course, all of North Carolina and the Southeast. I'm referring to the North Carolina Ports and the North Carolina Ports Authority. We are now welcomed by its new executive director, CEO, president. His name is Brian Clark, and we are glad to have him. President Clark, Brian, welcome to the program, and congratulations on the job.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Let's start with the whole idea. You've been on the leadership team for a while, Brian, so working with Paul Koza, this is not new to you, at least the port in North Carolina. Brian, when you try to, as you deployed a 5-year plan, but even before that, we have come through quite a sea change and quite a secular change in our businesses. So how do you find this reset on what a baseline to where you can measure growth coming through COVID-19? How do you get to that?
Sure. So obviously the last year and a half was very difficult. We saw some significant impacts to the markets we traditionally serve, the cargo volumes that we handled. We saw some impacts to our team, but ultimately, we were able to weather the storm last year. We actually had what was a very, very strong year considering the challenges. We just completed our fiscal year, June 30th. We'll be getting ready to report some numbers, and they were some record numbers. So we're very proud of the work the team did. They worked on the front lines, continuing to move cargo, work ships. We are preparing for our next fiscal year, the new budget for next year, and we anticipate growth. So we're looking at certain segments that we expect strong growth. And there's certain segments where we're certainly a little less bullish as to what the forecast holds.
When you look at in March, there were a record number of containers coming through the port. I know that was released. Was that because we were coming off a lower bottom, or was there substantial organic growth in that number?
There was some good, strong growth. There was some very strong growth in certain segments. The Trans-Pacific volumes were strong. Europe was rebounding. Our north-south services had seen some steady growth. Mm-hmm. If you compare it from a year ago, from March, certainly that was the start of the COVID impact. But we had not seen a significant drop off from March of 2020. It kind of occurred at that last quarter of our fiscal year. So we're very happy with the results. March was a strong month. And as I said, we're very, very happy with where the volumes materialized for the full year.
And Beavon?
Yeah, so staying on the topic of COVID, are there any processes or changes that you guys experienced that you want to keep in part of your mode of operations moving forward?
Great question. So COVID was an interesting impact. Obviously, it was a global pandemic. It changed the way we worked. We were not prepared for remote work, but we quickly turned to, at least from the administrative staff, to a remote work environment. I think we handled that well. Mm-hmm. What I really liked coming out of COVID was this collaboration amongst the ports on the East Coast. We very quickly, in a smaller group, but it expanded to a North America base, or at least a US base, was weekly discussions. They eventually moved to bi-weekly and monthly, but it really was a best practice sharing. And I think for the industry, for the transportation industry to succeed in the future, if there's ever a challenge like this, it's to make sure that we're working together, sharing these best practices, and making sure that, ultimately our goal is to move cargo. And if we're not able to operate, then that's going to obviously have an impact.
Awesome.
Brian, I recognize that the logjam of ships that were unable to unload off the West Coast into those ports was driven by some extraordinary circumstances, but it's certainly not the first time that those ports have experienced something like that. What are the lessons learned from that, and how can your port and other ports along the East Coast leverage and take advantage of that from a competitiveness standpoint?
Sure. There certainly have been some challenges on the West Coast in the past. We've seen labor issues. We've seen, obviously with the COVID impact and the backlog of vessels. I think the way the ports on the East Coast can take advantage of those opportunities is to provide the services that these carriers need. Certainly there's that intermodal connection that's so key to move the cargo into the hinterland. That's an area where we're focusing on growing our capability to ensure that we have that in the future as it's needed. It's being flexible enough to work vessels or new services into a rotation, having that berth capability, having the labor capacity. We've seen a few services stood up on the East Coast this year. They were mostly north of us. I believe there's a Baltimore and a Norfolk service, the direct Trans-Pacific service, to help alleviate some of that congestion on the West Coast. And I believe the Gulf also has a new service as well, very similar. The U.S. Gulf has a new service for the same purpose.
Brian, you had mentioned the idea that there was collaboration on the East Coast ports during COVID. So this unscheduled, unintended consequence of closer collaboration obviously falls into the idea that your closest neighbor is a large port, the South Carolina ports, Jim Newsom, who I know you know. So so have you gone more for, and this is, apologies, sir, the way this is going to come out, have you gone more from a competitive nature with South Carolina to more of a collaborative nature? And what does that look like exactly?
I think the competition will always be there. From proximity, from the markets that we both serve or can serve, it'll certainly remain. I've got the greatest respect for Jim Newsom and his team and the work they've done at South Carolina. They had a new terminal that opened up this year. They've made some great investments. We've made some significant investments here in North Carolina as well, and it's really to try to capture that market that we haven't been able to serve in the past because we didn't have the capabilities. But I certainly think there's opportunity for collaboration. We collaborate with other ports, not just in the COVID environment. There are agreements in place to work for, alongside other port authorities in certain areas. Because there's that market overlap that's so natural between states and between ports.
Mm-hmm. And Beavon?
Yeah. So as you look toward the next decade, where do you see the greatest opportunity for growth that might have been a little bit surprising before COVID?
So I think what really helped us weather the storm of COVID was that we are balanced between general cargo and containerized cargo. So we saw that where the initial drop off of container freight was really supported by some of the very strong growth in general cargo. I can pick one out. The import lumber was actually one of the strongest performing markets or segments this past year. No one had ever thought, as the country was shutting down for COVID, that there'd be such a demand for import lumber for home improvement projects and construction projects. So as we look forward, it's certainly making sure that we have a balanced portfolio and growth in those individual portfolios. We want to continue to have that capacity to work general cargo, whether it's bulk or break bulk vessels, both here and in Morehead City. But we're also making investments in certain segments like the refrigerated container segment. We realize that's one of our highest growth opportunity areas. We've made significant investments this past year, and we'll continue to do so over the next several years to capture more of the market that should naturally be flowing through these ports.
Bob?
Yeah.
A broad question. What do you consider some of your biggest challenges? What are your intended solutions for those challenges? And since I'm a technology guy, those solutions that are technology based, do you ever partner with universities or other outside entities to develop those solutions?
So I think the biggest challenge we have and we're addressing is, expanding our connectivity. We serve local markets today between Wilmington and Morehead City. There's opportunity to have a further reach within the state, the region, and throughout the country. Intermodal rail is extremely important, part of our 5-year growth plan. And we're working closely with the rail providers to ensure that we have those capabilities in the near future to be able to grow and support additional volumes. We are almost at the end of a significant technology project. We're upgrading our terminal operating system. We're upgrading our gate operating systems to handle the exchange of information. We are deploying a new community access portal to make the visibility of the transactions much more efficient for our users of the port. And to your last question, collaboration and coordination with universities, I think, is extremely important. And it actually takes a very prominent role in our 5-year plan, is how we can become better engaged with the local school systems, whether it's high schools or community colleges or universities, to really identify what's needed to support the industry in the future, and ensure that we're training or providing the training for those individuals that have an interest for this field.
Brian, I know you just got an approval for a little bit more than 26 million in CapEx projects, and as well as a carryover of 21 million. Beyond that, how closely are you watching this extended session of budgetary debate back and forth in North Carolina, and especially around one of the biggest issues, and that's transportation? So that has to affect not just roads, rail, but just the community in general along eastern North Carolina. And how key would any additional transportation, and how welcome would it be for your team?
Well, I think ensuring that the transportation challenges are addressed is extremely important. Obviously, we have local concerns, but for us to grow and for us to support the state and grow to deliver on our mission, which is to support the economy in North Carolina, it's to ensure that the transportation network continues to advance, whether it's through technology, road improvements, rail improvements. But ultimately, as cargo freight increases, we want to ensure that it can move efficiently and doesn't have a negative impact in the communities where it's moving through. So staying closely involved and anxiously awaiting for the final budget discussions in Raleigh.
Yeah. AB?
Yeah, so in the previous part of the show, we talked a little bit about unemployment and the hiring concerns. Are you guys facing difficulty in hiring? Are you looking to expand? What does that look like from your perspective?
Sure, another great question. I think a challenge everyone's facing right now. We are looking to expand our workforce. We've got a great team. We've got an opportunity to grow it. So we're looking to increase our overall headcount. What we're seeing is fewer applications traditionally for those positions than we've seen in the past. So we continue to work through different sources and hopefully attract the talent that wants to stay and work with us on a long-term basis. The team, as I said, has been tremendous through the past year and a half. They continue to deliver exceptional service levels, and we have the opportunity to grow that team. So we're, as I said, working through and trying to build the overall staff.
Bob, we're going to run out of time, so I need to ask a quick follow-up question. So Brian, in the brief time that we have left here, you've referred to your growth plan, your 5-year growth plan a couple of times now. And one of the issues or one of the goals in that growth plan is growing containers in the next 5 years by 50%. That's not a small number. What's the plan? How do you do that? You have the capacity for it, clearly. But I mean, what's the corpus of the idea and how you get to that number?
So as we look at the volumes that move in and out of North Carolina, today we handle a very, very small percentage of what should naturally move through our gateway. We do have aggressive plans to grow the volume, but it's to grow the share that naturally should be moving through the port today. Ultimately, as I said, our goal is to reduce costs to enhance the economy. All the investments that have been made in the infrastructure to handle the volumes, to handle these larger Neo-Panamax vessels, allows us to grow our services, to grow the number of port pairs, if you will, the global reach, and to make it easier to do business for consumers and producers in North Carolina. So we have a 5-year plan to grow that volume. Ultimately, it would increase what today is about a 10 to 12% share of the home market to about a 17 or 18% share. So.
Okay. Brian, thank you I don't have enough time to unpack 1,000 of other things, but you're a good sport to go along with this. And it's always nice to see, I think for North Carolina, it's been an orderly transfer of power from Paul Koza to you, and that will benefit the citizens of the region. Thank you for being our guest. Good luck going forward. Anna Beavon, always nice to see you. Bob, good luck down in the Low Country and across the state. Good to see you all. Happy summer. Until next week, I'm Chris William. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can always go to carolinabusinessreview.org. Watch any of our programs and participate. Until next week, good night and have a good weekend.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you.